Hi, everyone. This is Jaime Alejandro with the Arts Calling podcast, the place where I interview hardworking independent creatives in the literary, visual, and performing arts. Just a quick reminder, if you look at the episode description, I have one weekly shout out, so be sure to check out those links. There's exciting projects, new publications, podcasts, and other independent projects from previous guests and friends of the show. So be sure to take a look at them. We have to support independent artists, so let's do the best we can and support each other. Now, getting the show on the road, I am delighted to be Arts Calling author Heather Bartel. Heather Bartel is the author of the essay collection Exit the Body from Split Lip Press. Her writing has appeared recently in Fence, Birdcode Quarterly, Leavings, Grimoire, and Heavy Feather Review. She is the founder and co-editor of the literary journal and community, The Champagne Room. Heather lives, writes, and dances in Columbia, Missouri. So let me tell you about the collection. In Exit the Body, Heather Bartel makes an offering as essay collection. If a collection of essays can include a tarot reading, a one-act starring dead and dreamed women, conversations with Sylvia Plath through a mirror, and letters to a living ghost. Like journeying through the hallways of a haunted house, Bartel moves through a narrative landscape that shapeshifts, engaging in conversation with the women who haunt her to ask the question at the core of Exit the Body. What to do with an obsession with the mirror when the person in the mirror is either the only person you can trust or the one who is trying to kill you. A dance with illusion and choice, Exit the Body is a meditation on the mind and its place within the body. What escapes, what ruptures, what is created, what echoes, and where we find ourselves on the other side. Now, folks, you're in for a treat because having a conversation with Heather was very much like a meditation in and of itself. I really had a wonderful time reading this work because it was very kaleidoscopic. It took a lot of angles and took a lot of risks, and it was so refreshing, surprising, but also deeply well written that I hope that you check it out. It is now available from Split Lip Press. Come and take a deep dive with Heather and I as we try to find deeper truths in this conversation. So without further delay, let's give Heather a call. Hi, Heather. Good evening.
Hi.
So it's finally wonderful to meet you. I know we've been looking to do this for quite a long time, so I'm so thankful that we finally got to make this happen. So where are you at these days? Where's home?
Home is Columbia, Missouri. This is where I grew up, and I actually just moved back here a little over a year ago, and I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, wonderful. It's nice to have that homecoming feeling, actually. Sometimes you need to go someplace and then realize, I got to come back home and really get, back to my home base.
Totally.
So if I may ask here, you are releasing Exit the Body, which should be coming out or did come out a few days ago. Is that right? So we're timing it kind of
Yes,
right?
it came out Yep. It came out last week.
How has that been for you? Yeah.
It's been really exciting. It's a small book with a small press, but that experience of publication has been very supportive and wonderful. I felt vulnerable before the book came out, but now that the book's out, I don't feel that vulnerable. I just feel excited.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, usually it's the other way around, isn't it? Where you feel like, oh, I am releasing my insights here out into the world, and what are people going to make of it? But I had the pleasure of reading the collection, and it's just a wonderful piece of writing because it's very intuitive, but it's also very, very like raw and visceral. And I really, really appreciated some of your references. You throw in David Lynch, or you throw in, some quasi-theatrical conventions that I was really taken with the work. So I want to congratulate you on that.
Thank you.
Can I ask you how you start putting this together? Because since we're diving into Exit the Body, the collection, you have a very interesting title here. It's an offering as an essay collection in so many words. So I'm curious what the genesis of this collection is and what really started it for you.
Yeah, this is one of those funny little stories in which I had a title before I had a book.
Mm,
And that never happens to me. I mean, I'm not great with titles, but I heard the phrase exit the body in a yoga class. It was about breath work. And
mm.
those 3 words just really stuck with me. And I thought, oh shit, this is what I'm writing into now. And I didn't know exactly what that meant. I just felt fixated on those 3 words. So then I think all of the writing that I was doing at that time kind of started to examine what that meant. It meant breath, the foundation of it. It also meant getting out of the head, getting out of the self. I do that in this book by doing a really deep study of Sylvia Plath. I was reading a lot of Plath before and during the writing process. And so many of the essays are in conversation with her and with this notion of otherness and wanting, and perhaps wanting to be not necessarily this other body, but to be so deeply in communion with a ghost. So, with a dead writer. So it ended up turning kind of spooky. And I'm glad that all the writing managed to work with the title, because I was determined to just like not lose that title. It felt very right to me.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you were quite successful with it because as I'm reading it, it does feel like I don't want to say supernatural, but there is that sort of diving deep into a layer beyond the body. And whether you were writing in different forms, of course, because I'm a playwright, I tend to go to the play form that you were experiencing. So that one was the most memorable for me. But these pieces, I feel like you were just kind of trying to find home bases for this kind of theme. So which pieces began, or which pieces did you start with as you were putting the collection together?
Oh, that's a really good question, because I was definitely developing several of them at the same time. Some of them, some pieces started with one piece and ended up in another piece. Some lines um, got moved around to other essays. But The Knife Speaks was one of the first essays I was working on. And actually, what is so wild about that essay is that it started as this crazy 40-page thing that I was trying to make sense of. And nothing was quite landing. Some lines were landing, some visions were landing, but I recognized how unruly and chaotic it was, and I needed to find a form and a focus. And so that's how I came to the notion of structuring it as a tarot reading. I was seeking inspiration, and so I pulled out my Sylvia Plath books and I got the shot of whiskey and I put out the tarot cards. And then I thought, okay, that's it. You're using these cards and you're going to cut what doesn't fit. And that was really helpful. I think that was one of the first ones that I managed to really finish.
So I remember there was an interview that you may have done a little while back where you were talking about how these originated more as free writing sessions. And I don't know if that's the right terminology here, but I love this notion of taking the raw material, or at least generating it originally, and trying to find forms for it. So could you elaborate a little bit more? Maybe give us some more examples of times when you had to do that? Because I love that initially you have this amorphous, sort of shapeless expression, and then you have to kind of start chipping away into something that makes a little bit more sense to your North Star, just because I think it's such a wonderful way to write.
Yeah, it is a wonderful and extremely useful and necessary way for me to write. When I was in grad school, I struggled to produce creative work. I would always get caught up thinking like an editor, trying to get everything correct the first time, um, seeking perfection rather than exploring. And that's very stifling. You can't get anything done. And so I worked with my final semester advisor, Douglas A. Martin, who used the phrase making mud.
Oh, that's
So he
great.
referred to the writing process. Yeah, he was just like, stop thinking, just make mud. And after you've made the mud, move the mud around.
Hmm.
And that has been my process since then. When I'm writing well, when I'm getting lost in it, it's because I'm not thinking about where something has to go. I'm not, I mean, like I said, I had a 40-page draft that is now a 4-page essay, but that's because I really needed to get lost in the process of creation and to let every idea come out. And like I said, some of those ideas work in other pieces because I let it all out, because I explored. And then I thought, oh, perhaps this is something, it's just not part of this essay.
Hmm.
So making mud is what I'm always trying to do.
That is a great phrase, and I'm going to steal that because it's so clear and so vivid, and you have to
Yeah.
be at peace with imperfection. I think a lot of us have that issue, and we struggle tremendously. How long was the process of originating versus the process of chipping away at the content that you had created? And I hate using the word content, so I apologize. The material, if you will,
Yeah.
the raw matter.
Oh, material's good. Material's great. Um, it varies. I This is an interesting question because right now I'm in the process of trying to make mud, and it seems like I'm never going to be in a place where I'm chipping away at it. You know, when you start something new and you're really trying to get lost in it, and you're like, what the hell is this and where will this go? I have no idea. I would say with Exit the Body, I had I had the luxury of being unemployed during the pandemic. And so I spent a lot of time with these pages. And because I had so much time to spend, the getting lost in each piece would probably be, a month maybe. And then I would stop for a while and start looking at what was there. But that was it was a really nice period in the sense that I had so much time to write and focus so fully on that. These days, I don't know how long that process is going to be. My life is much more crowded.
Well, it's kind of nice either way. You know, sometimes we're glad to have the time to spare, and other times it can be such a horrible curse that nothing is really being generated with that kind of freedom. I'm curious of how this climate of the pandemic affected your process as you went into this, because this is such an interior facing collection that I wonder, was this a sort of an escape to the circumstances, happening all over the world? Or was it something different? Was it something that you were trying to process about the environment?
I think it was both of those things. I was home alone all of the time, and a really great thing that happened was that I suddenly had time to read both volumes of the letters of Sylvia Plath. And those are big books. And being so immersed in that, in her life, in her words, and then I was reading the letters and then continuing to study her creative work as well. That was my escape. That fixation, that obsession, that relationship I was creating with her and her art was my escape from from everything else going on. The escape was also rooted in turning very inward. So sometimes it didn't feel like an escape. And that's how the writing happened because I needed to get out. I needed to get out of my head. I guess, exit the body in a
Mhm.
sense. But I think that the conditions were right for me to read so much and fall so deeply. And I needed to make something of that obsession. I needed to create communion. And that is that's how Exit the Body was formed. It
Hmm.
was kind of a kind of a form of survival in a lot of ways.
That's an interesting point you make about communion because there are some pieces that kind of rely heavily on that idea of togetherness, especially when you're speaking about women, whether you're talking about Sylvia Plath or Lynchian women, the great David Lynch and sort of the different muses that he seems to throw into a lot of his work. And I'm curious of how that through line came to be because one might sort of generally say, oh well, since we were all alone in the pandemic, maybe we all wanted a sense of community, and that's where you went. But how did you start originating that idea of communion in your mind, or did it come to you as you were doing this free writing and you let it come to you in a sense?
Yeah, a lot of it was letting it come to me, I would say. I know you mentioned the essay as one act play earlier,
Yeah.
Coven. That was one. Um, I I decided to play one day. I thought, what if Sylvia Plath started talking to all of these characters that I'm also obsessed with, these women screaming. I have these images of women screaming that I return to in Yet the Phantom Was Part of the Flower. And then in Coven, I'm demonstrating that. I'm showing these women screaming, and they're all in conversation with one another, and they're all in conversation with me, although I'm the one witnessing them rather than participating in the discussion. Uh, and I came to that simply because I felt like fooling around. I felt like making them speak. And that's part of the freedom of making mud is you can do the weird things and see where they go. And I definitely didn't believe that what I was making was going to end up in the book. I thought this is just some weird thing I'm doing to step away from the other essays I'm working on. I need a break, so I'm going to do something weird. Maybe it will help me better understand these women that I'm
Mm.
writing about and these women I'm seeking communion with, these ideas I'm seeking communion with. Um, and then it kind of fit.
If I may ask, what kind of nonfiction or other types of essays do you normally work on in contrast to this? Because you kind of make it seem like this is somewhat of a departure, a little bit more liberated in what you're wanting to talk about. What was probably the biggest difference in what you normally write from this?
I would say the freedom of structure. There are earlier essays that I've written are they're fluid in language. I like to write toward a rhythm, I think in movement. And so the language and the fluidity of my writing is pretty consistent. However, in this piece or this essay collection, I I really played with the form of the essay. Uh, I have tended in the past more toward paragraphs. And this book, I think there's perhaps one essay in here that is structured in traditional paragraphs. And even that essay is broken up by weird ghost whispers. So I felt liberated in playing with the form so much, and I that experience has made me realize I don't want to do it any other way. So now I'm trusting myself anytime I think, oh, what if I wrote an essay in this form? What if I played with this idea? It doesn't matter if it doesn't work out. I just need to get it out of my system. I need to see if it's actually a way in which I can format these ideas.
At any point prior to publication, did you feel like you got cold feet about some of these forms? I just mentioned this because of how, I don't want to say out there because there's deliberate form use in all of these, which I absolutely love. But I feel like, in some literary communities or some circles, they would say, oh, well, it's too freewheeling, it's too this or too that. But, this is the stuff that I absolutely love because I feel it's such an accurate depiction of a human being, and in particular, an emotion or a feeling that doesn't necessarily come through as well when you're in a tidy sort of traditional essay form or whatever other, quote unquote acceptable form you're using. So at any point, did you feel like you really had cold feet or had to struggle with the reality of putting something that is drastically different from what you see in essay?
Yeah. I I really admire writers that play with form. And so I knew and I know that there are non-traditional pieces being published. I know that a lot of writers are playing and testing and making creating new boundaries and ideas. And I I wouldn't say that I got cold feet because I know the essay form very well. Therefore, I felt comfortable breaking the rules. I think you have to know something very well in order to play around with it. And so the writers that sometimes a writer just doesn't know the rules, but has an amazing idea. And I respect the hell out of that because I had to study a lot of writing in order to finally feel comfortable letting myself go in my own writing. Um, but I also read a lot of writers who know what they're doing, who understand language and who understand form, and then decide to break the rules. And I think that that can be so masterful, just letting the idea be bigger than the simple structure of a paragraph.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you answering that. A lot of the time, I feel like it's an important message to send out to folks who are at the beginning of the journey, no matter what form they're experiencing. Because, for me as a playwright, I read a lot of scripts, and whether they're plays or screenplays, and sometimes I'm drawn to something that is so unique, but you realize that maybe this person doesn't really have a sense of why the structure works or why it isn't. It's just sort of an organic thing. So I appreciate you sharing that. Now, I didn't get a chance to ask you about the work that you do as an editor yourself, right? You run a literary magazine, is that correct? A journal?
I do. I do. I run a little journal with my co-editor, EA Midnight. It's called The Champagne Room. Um, yeah, she's a small gal. We're working on the fourth issue. We're reading submissions for the fourth issue right now. And I would say that reading submissions as an editor has so helped my experience of submitting my own work. Because when you read work as an editor, sometimes you love it. It's great. It just doesn't belong in your journal. And so recognizing that about my own journal and what we were looking for, I thought, oh, okay, my work isn't getting rejected because everybody hates it. It's getting rejected because it simply doesn't belong there. And
Mm.
that can be hard to continue to believe the more rejection letters you get. But I think that that is so fundamental, and it's humbling to realize that there is so much amazing writing out there, and you really do just have to find the right place for it. You have to continue to try and work toward that. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
So, as you mentioned, this is a woman operated literary journal. Could you elaborate a
it
bit
is.
about the mission of the journal? Because I think it's important over at the Champagne Room.
Yeah. The Champagne Room was established uh, as a space. We wanted to create a literary interpretation of a room. So it was very important that the journal itself be physical, something that can be held, a space one can enter into, feeling the pages, receiving the words in that way. And the mission has evolved over time, but
Sorry, I
I
didn't mean
haven't
to
been
put you on the
thinking as an
spot.
editor
Yeah.
much these days. I know I'm so immersed in the book stuff right now
Yeah,
that I'm
yeah.
like, oh yeah, I'm editing this journal too. I'm so behind. Oh no.
No, I appreciate it, but yeah, it just seems like such a wonderful mission. I think you articulated that very well, actually, because it is just this idea of creating a physical space and an opportunity for people to experience it. Yeah.
And we want the journal to be we want the champagne room to be bigger than a journal. We really want to create a community.
Mm,
This is why we do our contributor conversations on the website every month. We value our writers and we want them to feel like they're part of something bigger than the journal. We want them to get to talk about the writing process and what they're reading. And even though our community is small, it's supportive in
mhm.
that we want them to exist in a space other than the physical space of the journal. We want them to get
Right.
to share more of themselves. And our contributors have responded really well to that. I mean, writers like to talk about writing. And a lot of our writers are folks who, or, a significant amount of our writers are folks who are being published for the first time or who just have a small number of publications, who don't have a book yet. And so it's so exciting to be so green and to have someone ask you questions about your work because
Mhm.
that makes you feel like you are part of something greater. You're not just
Mhm.
getting a random poem published in a random journal. You're a writer in the community.
That's a wonderful feeling and a service that you're doing, so it's greatly appreciated. I'm glad you mentioned the print only publication aspect of it, just because I wondered if maybe there was some kind of anti-digital stance, if you will. But you don't have any issues with that, really? It's not a concern.
Um, I mean, I will say making a print journal is way more expensive than a digital journal would be. Um, I also just think it's more beautiful to hold on to something. I think there are a lot of lovely digital journals, by the way. I mean, I've been published in some that I really admire, but I just think it feels extra special to see your words on a page.
Mm,
And I want to continue to give writers that experience because I know I enjoy it. It feels so good to receive a contributor copy and
oh yeah.
find your words among others' words.
Exactly, exactly. So I know that it might seem like we're going backwards, but usually I start at the beginning and I work my way to the present. But this time around, I, for some reason, decided to do it in reverse. But I'm curious of your experiences as a student and how you sort of found your footing in your craft, because it is a long journey, and I imagine that you started as a younger person, right? Exploring writing and
I
yeah. How was that for you? I think I'm curious of how you started defining your perspective, especially as a student.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have loved being a student. I don't feel like I'm a student right now. I felt like I was a student when I was diving into Sylvia Plath. Like it was a self-led study. Um, and that was a very important part of my journey as a student. But I attended Webster University in St. Louis as an undergrad, and I came to my English major later on in the process. But as soon as I arrived there, I knew that it was where I was supposed to be, and I was learning so much about writing. I was learning so much about form and style, And I think that that is why I love being an editor, because I love language. I love punctuation. I love getting into the nitty-gritty of a sentence and knowing why a sentence is a good and effective sentence. I think that has been fundamental to my experience as a writer, is just really getting to the root of things and trying to master it. Trying to read everything I can and study those sentences at the level of every punctuation point, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so that was huge for me. I was thinking very critically. Uh, it was harder for me to break into my own writing, I think, because when you have the critical brain and the editor brain turned on, you are criticizing and editing your own work, or at least I was. And so it was hard for me to let go and write a full piece without getting caught up in the structure of every sentence. I needed to understand why I was using this punctuation point. I needed to understand why I was breaking the paragraph here. I needed to understand everything I was doing. But that was the wrong time to do that, you know? The editor brain can be turned on later. And sometimes it's better to let someone else edit your work so that they can tell you why those punctuation marks are or are not working. Um, when I went to grad school at Goddard College, rest in peace, I believe they just closed
Mm.
their doors
Oh
this
man.
semester. Yeah.
Wow.
But Goddard College was a really special experience for me. It was a low residency program, which meant it was very independent. I largely chose everything that I was reading. There would often be suggestions from my advisors, but usually it was what I was interested in, what I wanted to study, what I felt I was getting the most out of at that moment. And again, I really excelled at the critical work. I was loving studying all of these books, but I was there for creative writing, so I had to have a creative thesis at the end. And I wrote my entire creative thesis in my final semester because it took me that long to meet someone who told me to make mud. And that's when everything kind of clicked and I let go. And that was an extremely important lesson as a student, to learn how to let go and make the mud. Uh, that was those are the basics of my educational journey, my life as a student. Now it's self-led, but I feel like I learn so much from the people that I talk to. I'm a very social person, and I am often found out talking rather than sitting at home writing. But I need to talk through ideas to, like, understand if they're real and to hear what other people have to say, and my mind is always going. So, I'm always taking note. I'm always making physical notes of things, and, right now I would say I'm a very social student, but it's because I'm taking so much in.
Now that's the way to be. I feel that it's such a component of the creative pursuit that we have to find ways to maintain that magnetism with other people, because if we stray too far from community or people, it starts to get messy, I think.
And when you're not in a classroom every day anymore, or even in a very independent led grad program, when you're not in those spaces all the time with other like-minded folks, you need to find those folks and you need to
Mhm.
have those conversations so that y'all can keep connecting and learning from each other.
Right, right. Do you feel like a lot of these ideas made their way into this collection? Just to I'm curious whether there were explorations or maybe thoughts that you got from somebody that, wasn't really in the arts, but just maybe a conversation or something that made its way, that you vividly remember saying, "Oh, this belongs here in this collection."
Huh. That is a really good question. Ah, well, hmm. Honestly, with this essay collection, I'd have to say no because I was spending much more time alone.
Right, right.
Uh, yeah, I was spending a lot of time alone, and so actually the inspiration for this was largely my conversations with other writers in not in the speaking sense, but in the books that I was reading. Um, I was trying to be a part of a more ephemeral conversation. Um, yeah, I was not talking to a lot of people.
Right. The moment I asked that question, I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, pandemic, right. This massive thing that disrupted everything.
I know
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, of a line or something. I remember in a draft of an essay, I got really fixated on something my ex-husband said to me. We were married at the time, and he said, "You're no good as a bump on a log." And I just got fixated on that line, and I rode into it for days. Like, I really rode that line hard, but it didn't end up anywhere in the collection. So, that might have been the one conversation piece that could have made it in, but then I was like, "No, it's not actually there."
Yeah, maybe it wasn't the right fit, yeah, for this particular collection. So
Right.
there's wonderful imagery, however, that you have in this collection, in particular Midwest imagery and presence of that. I mean, because I'm from Wyoming, you know, and I'm currently in Wyoming, which is my home always. You mentioned the wind, and immediately I just feel the wind as a presence because
Yeah.
it doesn't stop here. Like it, you know, usually we got like 50, 60-mile-an-hour winds over here. So just generally speaking, in terms of the environment, you say there's this wonderful line, does a woman move differently if she was a girl in the Midwest? That whole segment was just really wonderful. One of my favorites in the whole collection here. But can you elaborate a bit more what that means to you to look in the environment of the Midwest that you call home and bring it into these pages?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of that desire came from homesickness. I actually wrote this book while I was living in Athens, Georgia. And so I was holding really tight to my Midwestern identity in this strange town in the South that I just uh, I couldn't find home in it. And so I was realizing just how deeply rooted I was in Missouri. Every time I came home to visit, I felt like my shoulders went down so far. You know, I was releasing so much tension, I could breathe. And so when I write into a landscape, I'm thinking of those roots. I'm thinking of growing up in a house in the woods. I'm thinking of the way that the forests in Missouri are different than the forests in Georgia, where I was living at the time. And I wanted the forests that I knew that were familiar to me. I wanted the trees and the rocks and the wind, you know, the air, everything feels different. Um, and I was trying to capture all of that because I felt so far away from it. And yet, being Midwestern, being from Missouri was powerful and essential for me, and I clung to it. I needed that part of my identity. And so I couldn't write about anywhere else. I just know Missouri better than anywhere else. Yeah, you know, you talk about the place you're from, the place you will always be from. And I feel that very much about my little town here.
Great to hear. Now I got a couple more questions to be mindful of your time here, but in the spirit of sharing some other interests here, I'm curious what pieces of art are inspiring you at this time, or maybe works of art that linger with you. It doesn't have to be a book or writing in particular, but just some pieces that are evocative to you.
Uh, Without giving too much away, because this is a future writing project, I'm really into the horror movie right now, just structurally. Um, and I don't have any specifics at the moment, but I'm in the process of doing some deep dives into horror films, because I'm exploring some structural things there.
That's wonderful to hear, and I greatly appreciate it. Now that the collection is out into the world, and you sort of have a clear horizon, I know that you mentioned that you had something that you were kind of working on to maybe follow up this collection. But are there any other specific types of work that you're looking to explore outside of essay that would follow up this collection?
Hmm. Do you mean writing?
Sure, sure,
I
yeah,
asked,
yeah.
well, I asked that just because my first instinct is to talk about the fact that I'm also a dancer.
Oh,
And
and we didn't even
so
cover that.
I
I'm sorry.
no, 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 no. I just, of course you didn't know that. But like I'm thinking about, oh, what's next? And I'm thinking, well, I'm really enjoying my dance classes right now. But I think that that is relevant. That's relevant in my writing as well, because this is something that's been coming up conversationally. All my friends talk about how much I talk about dance and how much I love dance. And they're like, have you ever thought about writing about dance? And yes, yes, I think about it all of the time, but I don't know how. Every time I try to do it, it sounds like I'm writing a "This is why I love dance" essay. Um, and so I think what I think I think what I want to try to focus on more as I'm exploring some ideas, some content ideas, is to really continue to think about the movement
Hmm.
of a piece, the rhythm of a piece, and to perhaps dig into that in a way that is specifically a dance. I don't think of my writing as a dance, I think of it as a rhythm. And the
Hmm.
two are related, of course. But I think, yeah, that's something that I want to lean into in some upcoming projects is getting dance in there somehow,
Hmm.
connecting writing and dance. I'm really interested in pairing the two, like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
visual performance with also with something being read. I don't know, that's really ambitious and I don't know how I would get there, but I do think about it a lot.
And I'm really glad you mentioned that. Thank you for sharing that with me because as I kind of recollect on the collection, I don't mean to project and say, "Oh, this is totally influenced by dance or this or that," but pieces like, Coven, I believe was the name of it, and Trajectories, which I kind of made a mention of it. They felt they felt like they had movement. They felt like they had rhythm and things that inherently a dancer would use to communicate. And I thought this feels like a performance in waiting. This feels like something that sort of transcends the page. And I think that's kind of what do I mean? Inherently exists in a dancer who who also
Yeah.
writes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of my work does transcend the page, and that can be challenging when you're in a reading situation. I think about pieces that I'll read, and there are certain pieces I immediately say no to because I'm like,
Hmm.
"Well, how do I read this?"
Yeah. Yeah.
But but I want it to be performed. It's a performance. It's not a reading. So Coven is a performance. Reflection is a performance. These two things can be performed. These two essays can be performed. Uh, I don't know if they can simply be read.
Sure, sure.
And that's from my dancer brain. That's that process of, oh, I'm on stage now. I'm showing.
Hmm.
I'm moving. And these essays move in a way that I'm very proud of, but I don't always know how to present.
No, absolutely. And I totally get the concern because I feel like it's sort of my curse, right? Where I'm in love with the page, but then when you see it, it transforms into something beyond your control and you feel like, can I have some handrails here or something to sort of keep it with proper intention. But I really love that about the work is that it did feel like it wanted to leap at you in a way that was different from just traditional, writings like that. But okay, that's another conversation. I'm so glad that you mentioned it, though. Hopefully down the road, I hope you get that kind of work done, because it's so interesting to me. This idea of taking this kind of form and then translating it, if you will, to the stage or to a performance. But that's a whole bunch of other things, to talk about. But I got one more question for you here, to be mindful of your time. So, because Arts Calling is sort of a podcast that I selfishly started to try to get a sense of how creatives balance their life, how they define their life. I did a horrible job in the past, but I'm trying to do better now. And the last question here that I want to ask you is how, over the years, you have defined what it means to lead a life well lived. In your own terms, what are your terms? How did those change? And what are you looking forward to in the future that will help you have a life well lived?
This is something I think about all the time. I try to be very mindful of it. I would say that being a creative individual is part of that for me, which means right now, a career is not important to me. I mean, I have a job. I have a job because I have to have a job and I work hard at it, but it's not my identity. And I think the other elements of my life, the writing, the dancing, the yoga, the movement and the creation and the socialization are enormous tethers for me. I think that to me, a life well lived feels like a life in which I am in movement. I am studying what interests me. I'm taking time to sit outside and be still. And I'm taking plenty of time to have enlightening or absurd or just challenging, interesting, whatever conversations with whoever wants to talk to me. I think it comes from both the time with myself and with other people. And that doesn't always mean in professional pursuits. It just means in the pursuit of living.
I think that's a very powerful, very thoughtful note to end on. So, Heather, thank you so much. This has been such a blast and a pleasure to get to know you and your work. Again, the collection is Exit the Body. It's available from Split Lip Press. And I want to give a shout out to Abigail over there for helping us make this happen. But thanks for being awesome and for your work. And I hope that we get to chat down the road whenever you get a chance. But keep doing your thing. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we got to do this.
All right. You take care. Have a good one.
All right. Bye.
Bye.